Imagine this. Throughout your entire life, you've been living with a terminal illness that currently has no cure and it won't have a cure in the near future. Maybe your physician just diagnosed you with an inoperable brain tumor and that your life will end in 6 months and that your death will be very painful and filled with seizures. Then start to think for yourself, is there something else I can do? Then you start to think about assisted suicide. You then have to ask yourself a slew of questions. Will my physician even allow this? Is it even legal in my state? And what will my family think? Is this the right thing to do? Hi, my name is Riley McCoy, and today I'll be discussing why assisted suicide should be legal in all of the United States and maybe even globally. First, I will discuss the difference between euthanasia and assisted suicide, because those terms are kind of just thrown around, and some people think they mean the same thing, which is not true at all. Then I'll discuss why it's illegal in the 41 of the 50 states. That's over 80% of the United States. I'll discuss why it's illegal there. And then I will discuss, even if legalized in the United States, the effects won't be negative. They won't be terrible, and they won't have a big grip on the nation. And firstly, I will discuss what is the difference between euthanasia and assisted suicide. In an article published in July 2019 by The Guardian, it states, euthanasia refers to the active steps taken to end someone's life to stop the suffering, and the final deed is undertaken by someone other than the individual. For example, a doctor. If the person concerned has requested this, it falls under the term voluntary euthanasia. Assisted suicide is about helping someone take their own life at their own request. In other words, assisted suicide can be used to mean both euthanasia and assisted suicide. Now, the process of assisted suicide is upheld by the individual and the responsibility with their decision. In a 2018 article by Medical News Today, they state, intentionally helping a person's voluntary and competent request. Some definitions include in order to relieve intractable suffering. Since pain is the most visible sign of distress of persistent suffering, people with cancer and other life-threatening chronic conditions will often receive palliative care. Opioids are commonly used to manage pain and other symptoms. An overdose can be lethal. Now, this shows that from the evidence that euthanasia and assisted suicide are not the same thing and that they should not be thrown around as synonyms for each other. There are actually differences. The differences between them is that euthanasia is administered by someone onto an individual, whereas assisted suicide is administered by the individual with the consent of, say, a doctor or a physician. Now, we'll discuss why is assisted suicide illegal in over 80% of the states. In a 2019 paper from the Lone Star College in Houston, it states, on the other side of the issue, however, people who are against assisted suicide do not believe that the terminal illness have the right to end their suffering. They hold it against the Hippocratic Oath for doctors to participate in active euthanasia. Perhaps most of these who hold this argument don't know that. The oath makes the physician promise to relieve pain and not to administer deadly medicine. This oath can't be applied to cancer, however. As a result of chemotherapy, the body suffers incredible pain, hair loss, vomiting, and other extremely unpleasant side effects. Thus, chemotherapy can be considered a deadly medicine because of its effects on the human body. And this inconsistency is why the Hippocratic Oath can't be used to deny assisted suicide. Now, this shows that although chemotherapy and assisted suicide are two different things, this allows that in the scenario of the Hippocratic Oath, they're both being able to be practiced while violating the Hippocratic Oath, which is what many doctors do. Many don't uphold the Hippocratic Oath currently because it does not go with the means of the hospitals. In some cases in Canada, it's similar to that. And now I'm going to discuss if legalized, the assisted suicide will not have profound effects on the nation and will not cause it to halt. In a 2016 Daily Signal article, according to Oregon's numbers, here's what will happen if assisted suicide is legalized nationwide. It states, When you consider a country the size of the US, even right now, using Oregon's numbers, going up every year, you have well over 10,000 per year who would have assisted suicide, which is a relatively small number in the scope of the United States population. Now, moreover, in another article titled Assisted Dying in Other Countries, published in February 2020, it states, in general, in Switzerland, those who are eligible for an assisted suicide are adults who are terminally ill, who are suffering from a severe disability, and elderly persons whose lives have become too arduous due to old age. Despite such assistance being a practice for decades in Switzerland, about only 1.5% of the Swiss have died with means of assisted suicide. Now, these people who go through assisted suicide, they do so in their best interest, and they do so as their practice of a citizen, and they are the ones who get to choose how they get to die, and they're merely practicing their own decision making based on their means and the rationality of their happiness. These people who typically, there's obviously other extraneous situations in which assisted suicide won't be under the confirmation of a doctor, but typically people who die by assisted suicide are practicing their own journey of happiness. This is what will make them happy. They are practicing a way, and they're also fulfilling a way to a peaceful end, maybe in which they might have a terrible end, similar to the brain inoperable tumor that I gave in the beginning of this speech. Now, in conclusion, we discussed the differences between euthanasia and assisted suicide, and I discussed maybe how it violates the Hippocratic Oath, and how it's similar to deadly medicine, that being chemotherapy. And moreover, the second point went over why the assisted suicide is similar to chemotherapy, in which is a deadly medicine, but you have to keep in mind about the people's means to administer the deadly medicine. And then thirdly, I went over, even if legalized, it won't have terrible effects on the nation. It will only affect possibly from the numbers around 10,000 a year, which is not a lot compared to the rest of the population. And like I said, assisted suicide should be legalized across all of the United States, maybe even globally, but I just believe across the United States as of right now. And just a final note, just what if you're in this situation? What if you were in the shoes of someone who knew in 2 months they were going to go through a terrible death, and then they only saw assisted suicide as a way to escape peacefully instead of a terrible death? That's why it should be legalized in your country and in your state. Thank you.